church in the entire world. You getting one of the best speakers in the entire world. You're getting the most anointed person in the entire world. Mama's in the house. You get my wife, Reverend Amanda J. Carlton. So give her some love. Come on. Come on.
Thanks. Well, thank you guys. Every time he says reverend, it sounds so funny, but I am a reverend, so he is speaking the truth there. I don't know about all the other stuff, but that is true. Well, I am so honored to be doing this tonight. Pastor Mike has actually been asking me for a while to preach, and I always tell him no. And this time, I really felt like God was like, you know what? Nope, this is what you need to do, and so you need to suck it up and make it happen. But I do want to say one thing before I jump in, is that I have some mad respect for my husband doing this 4 times every single Sunday, because, woo! So thank you, Mike, for doing that for us. But anyways, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about waiting. And the thing is we, as a society, are an impatient bunch. We don't like to wait for anything. We get angry when we have to wait for things. We are an instant gratification type of people. And and you can't really blame us. We have so much technology at our fingertips. You want to know something. I literally think that I say numerous times a week, Mike and I will be talking about something, and I'll be like, ooh, Google it. Or I'll Google it, and I just get on my phone really fast, and I figure it out, and then I feel super smart because, Google is always right. And you have all the answers right there at your fingertips. But studies have shown that people wait an estimated amount of 37 billion minutes waiting in line. That is a lot of time for us waiting, whether it's waiting at the doctor's office, whether it's waiting on the phone for customer service, whether it's waiting in the school pickup line, or waiting for your browser to load. We just are a people who wait all the time. I have a problem with this. I am a little bit of a control freak. And so one of my biggest issues is that I'm going to put myself on blast, but I have some serious road rage. I didn't have this road rage before I moved to Branson. When I lived in Springfield, I lived there for a long time. It's a different vibe. Everyone's in a hurry all the time, and everyone's pretty aggressive. There's tons of traffic, and you just kind of have to do what you have to do to survive. It's like you need to get over, but you're way over here. You just do it, and people just are okay with it. Branson is a whole nother pace of life. It's like a whole nother pace of living, and I wasn't used to that. And so I came here, and I started driving around, and people are like, and I'm like, I know you're local, and I know you've seen the Ferris wheel like 20 times. Come on, people, let's move it along, Or there's the other thing that I have to struggle with, Lord, forgive me, and that's the lovely tourists who never know where they're going, and there's like, they think they have to stop in the middle of the road, but anyway, see, I have issues. And so I'm trying, y'all. The struggle is so real for me, but I don't like to wait, and I don't know why I'm always in a hurry, but I always am. So the Lord is working on my heart. Another thing that really just drives me bonkers is waiting on my children. And I'm the kind of mom, I'm getting my kids ready for school in the morning, and I lay everything out. It couldn't be more simple. I lay out their socks and their shoes and their chonies and their shorts and their t-shirts, and it's all labeled basically like, this goes to you, this goes to you, And I'll be like, all right, come on, we gotta go, let's go. And I give them plenty of time. And I don't understand how it can take my children an entire Paw Patrol episode to put their shoes on. I'm like, come on, people. Maybe I just need to turn the TV off, But it's like I want to help them, but they just drive me crazy. But see, we're an impatient bunch. I'm an impatient person. But my point is that that's not always a good thing. Because sometimes those little pet peeves, those little things that kind of drive us crazy about waiting can sometimes affect us in a different way, kind of on a deeper level. One thing that I had to wait for in my life, my husband and I, is we waited 7.5 years to have our children. And that was a big deal for me. And it was a very hard 7.5 years, almost 8 years. I went through all the emotions, all the feelings. I had sadness, and I had a grief that I can't even explain. I had a lack of contentment. I had a lack of joy. And to be really honest with you, I had a lot of anger. And I'd like to say to you that during that time that I waited well, that I was a perfect waiter, that I trusted the Lord with my life through that wait time. But it wasn't the case all the time. Now, I eventually got to a place where all of those things did turn to positive things, and I was able to trust in Him and have faith, and I was able to be confident in Him, and I was able to be content and eventually have joy again. But it took me a long while. But during that time, I was forced, and I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth. I was forced to go to His Word. And I remember spending time in prayer just pleading with God and looking for anything in the Bible that would help me. And I remember going to the story of Hannah. And that's where we're going to spend our time tonight. But I want to share that story with you. But a little backstory is Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah. And Elkanah also had another wife. He had two wives. And she was named Peninnah. Now, Peninnah had a lot of children. Hannah had none. And she had a lot of sorrow over that. And when I read that, I had an immediate connection with her. I had an immediate feeling like, man, this woman, she understood what I was going through. And at the time when we were struggling through our infertility, it really wasn't as talked about as it is now. It's more, people are more open about it. There's way more things that you see online, and it's not so, hush, hush. But at the time, it kind of was, and I didn't really like to talk about it a whole lot either. So I felt very alone, much like Hannah did. And I read a quote by Joyce Meyer, and it changed my life. And it said, "Patience is not simply the ability to wait. It's how we behave while we're waiting." And that was like an immediate just like conviction to my spirit, because I felt like I had this like attitude, I had this like all these feelings, and I felt like I was not behaving well in my waiting. And so it just completely shifted me. And that leads me to my first point that I want to talk about tonight, and it's, when should I wait on God? And we should wait when our circumstances are out of my control. And I'm going to start reading here in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 3. And it says, "Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priests of the Lord at that time were the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the days Elkanah presented the sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat." And I thought about that, and I thought, man, what a place to be in, to feel like you have no control over your life. What a place to be in that you have no control how your husband views you or how your husband's other wife viewed you, and just that situation, and not even being able to control the portion of meat that was given to you because you didn't have children. And the way that this says it is because the Lord hadn't given her any children. So that kind of just, when I read that, I thought, man. And I remember thinking, during that time when I wasn't able to get pregnant, I remember thinking, how long is Mike going to last with me? And I know that's so bad to think, and he never made me feel that way. But in my emotion and in my pain, I thought, surely eventually one day he's going to wake up and be like, you know what? I can't do this, I need to be with someone who can give me children. And that used to taunt me. And I used to think, man, it's not fair. It's like this whole hypothetical thing, because he was never like that. But in my mind, it was like, it's not fair, I have no control and I can't help what's happening to my body. And so I felt this deep connection with Hannah that I knew. In verse 8, her husband questions her and he says, "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?" I read that and I was like, you've got to be kidding me, dude. You are so prideful right now. You have me, it's okay. Nothing in life matters but me. It's really no big deal. And I read that and I was like, dude, no. And so And so anyways, but Hannah did respect her husband, and she did, I believe, like in reading other versions of this, I do believe that she just really just kept pleading with God, that it was between her and God. And that leads me to my next point of when we don't understand is when we should wait on the Lord. In Luke chapter 12, verse 22 through 26, it says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?'" And I feel like the scripture is trying to give us an understanding of our value to the Lord, how he sees us. He's basically saying, if I care so much about the birds in the sky, how much more am I going to care for you? How much more am I going to do for you? Let me show you. He's like, they don't have to worry about how they're going to eat or how they're going to get food. So why are you so consumed by how I'm going to take care of you? And that just really ministered to me. And I feel like Hannah was in a place where she kind of started to get this. And she starts praying, and in verse 9 she says, "Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly." In another version, it says that Eli sees her, and he thinks that maybe she might be drunk, because she's kind of acting like a crazy woman in his eyes. She's got her eyes closed, and her mouth is moving, and he's like, are you drunk? And she's like, no, you misunderstand me. She says, I'm pleading with the Lord. I'm seeking him because I want children so bad, and it's not happening, and so I'm in deep pain and anguish. And he takes that, and he says, you know what? Okay, he's a priest. He has some authority, and he says, I'm going to take your request to the Lord for you. So he does, and he asks the Lord to grant her wish, basically to have a child. And another example of when we should wait on God is when our faith is being tested. Sometimes the last thing we want to do when our faith is being tested is seek God. I know it sounds silly, but it's the truth. The last thing we want to do is worship, is pray, is go to church sometimes, because you're just so tired. I guess that's the best way to say that. I remember just getting to a place where I was so tired. In verse 11, it says, "And she made a vow saying, 'Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head.'" This is an important part of the story, because she got to a point in her testing where she started to essentially proclaim what she wanted over her life. She began to shift her perspective, and then she says, when you do this, basically, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to raise this boy to serve you all the days of his life. I had the same kind of moment in my life. And I remember when my thinking shifted, and I was like, okay, God, I'm all in. I'm going to quit trying. But I remember saying, God, if you give me these children that I want, I promise you that I will live my life raising them to know you to the best of my abilities and keep them knowing who you are. And I'm going to have them in church, and I'm going to pray over them, and I'm going to teach them to pray, and I'm going to teach them how to serve you and how to seek you and how to trust you. And I remember having that same moment in my life. And I remember, it's just being this kind of like aha moment for me. See, because speaking life to your circumstances and doubts causes your faith to flood your soul with hope. I'm going to say that one more time. Speaking life to your circumstances and doubts causes your faith to flood your soul with hope. It shifts something in your mind, and then you begin to focus on the good, the hope. Number 2, why should I wait on God? Because God is in control. Earlier I talked about when. And it talks about how when we realize that we have no control. And we should, because God is in control. Isaiah 46:9-10 says, remember the things I have done in the past, for I alone am God. I am God, and there is none like me. Only I can tell you the future before it even happens. Everything I plan will come to pass, for I do whatever I wish. It's God's will. If you allow God to just move, his will take place. He'll plan it all out, and that's just it. And that's the way I see it. And I think about that, and that's kind of hard for us as people. It's kind of hard to trust God's will. It's kind of hard to lay our plans aside. For me, I had it all laid out, because I'm a control freak. We've talked about this. I like to be in control, and it's not in a negative way, but I like to be prepared. I like for things to be organized. And so when I was planning my life, I decided that I was going to get married at age 22. I don't know why, but that's when I wanted to get married. And by age 25, I was going to have my first child. Oh, and I forgot to tell you that when I got married, I was going to marry a super rich guy. Super rich guy. But I was going to have my first child by 25. And then, if I decided to have another child, I would do all of this before I was 30. And that was my plan. Yeah, that was my will, how I wanted things to go. Didn't always happen that way, but, that was part of my life plan. But the next point I have is that God has promised to reward those who wait. This is, I think, my favorite part, because he promises to reward you for your faithfulness in waiting on him. Isaiah 40:31 says, but those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Psalms 145:15-16 says, the eyes of all look to you in hope. You give them their food as they need it. When you open your hand, you satisfy the hunger and thirst of every living thing. Man, that's some good scripture right there. That's some powerful scripture. That's some hope right there in some words. And those kind of scriptures are what gets you through. They're the things that strengthen you. They're the things that encourage you. I'm going to continue on in verse 19. This is the part where Hannah receives her blessing. The entire family got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. When Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. When I read that, I kind of focus in on the part that says, and in due time she had a son. Now, you can take that as in due time she had the son, because she was pregnant for 9 months or however many months. But I kind of look at it on a deeper level. I think about how in due time, God granted her desires, her promises, because he does things in his time, and he's working when we can't see it. God's delays are not God's denials. Think about that for a second. Just because he's making you wait doesn't mean he's saying no. Just because it's a waiting season doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Just because you don't have your answer yet, it doesn't mean that he's not working on your behalf. And I think about that because I think about, other times in my life where I've been waiting on something and God has answered it and it looked how I wanted it. Other times I waited on something and he gave it to me and it looked completely different how I expected. And there's things I'm waiting for still that he has not moved yet on. But I don't take that necessarily as a denial. I just take that as he's working it out in his time. Part of, I want to share with you part of Mike and I's story. We waited, like I said, about 7.5, closer to 8 years before our family unit began, is what I like to call it. And I remember we got to a place where we had done fertility drugs, and they just I was over it. I was tired physically. I just didn't want to put myself through that anymore. And I had always wanted to adopt, always. Even before all of this, when Mike and I were dating, we always talked about how we wanted to adopt. And I wanted to have a multicultural family. I thought it'd be super cool to have Christmas cards with kids from all over the world, and it'd just be awesome. And so that was something I always wanted to do. And so when it came to the point where we were unable to have children of our, like biologically, we decided that we would begin the process to adopt and foster. So we did all of that. And once you do that, we were more just on the adoption side. So every day, basically, they would send me adoption profiles. So if this is something that you have ever, I'm going to do a little shameless plug real quick. But if this has ever been on your heart, it is absolutely heartbreaking the amount of children that are out there that need a home, that need a forever family. And I remember telling Mike, man, I wish I could take all of these kids. But everyone that would come through my email, I would open it, I would read it, and I would pray. And I'd say, Lord, if this is the child you have for us, then you're going to show me, you're going to reveal it to me. And if not, I would just pray for them. And I would pray that God would work something out for them, that they would have a forever family. And so I would get these emails all the time. And we were in Idaho. At the time, my brother Ernie lived in Boise, and we were visiting him and Sarah and his kids. And we were all piled up in his car. I don't remember where we were going, and we were probably illegally in this car because there was like 600 of us, and that's how us Hispanic people do things. We go in packs, hey, let's go to Walmart. Okay, all 20 of us, like all in one car. It's funny watching us get out. But anyway, so we were all together, and Sarah and I, we were in the very, very back of the Suburban, and I remember going through my email, and I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I just got an email for triplets. I was like, they're 1 month old. And I was like, look at this. And so we were looking at it. She's like, you should do it. She's like, come on. And if you know Sarah, she would have like 50 kids if Ernie let her. And so she's like, this is awesome. It's like an instant family. And she's going on and on. So I was like, hey, babe, to Mike. He was in the very front. And I was like, I just got an adoption profile on triplets. He's like, nope. He's like, delete the email. No. He's like, Amanda, no. And I was like, fine. I was like, okay, whatever. So I kind of out of sight, out of mind. Well, a couple months later, I was going through my email again, and I got another email about the triplets. And I opened it, and this time it was different. and what was going on their end of things was their parents had the parental rights had been terminated. And they were still in the hospital. They were born at 26 weeks. They were only 1 pound. And so they were in the NICU. All of my kids were there for 4 months, 4.5 months, or 5 months. And so they were there, and they were desperately looking for a family for them to go home to when they got out. And so they were very urgent in it. So me, being the person I am, I was like, okay. I said, go ahead and send my home study by email. I was like, well, I don't know why I just did that, but I did. And so I sent it. Well, then like another day goes by, and she like calls me, and she's like, hey, Amanda. She goes, this is my social worker. She's like, so are you really interested in the triplets? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, because we are setting up interviews. And if you want to do this and you want to move forward with this, she's like, I can get you in on Wednesday. That's the day we're starting. She's like, we can see you on Wednesday at 10 a.m. This is like a Monday. And she's like, so, I mean, we're ready to roll if that's what you want to do. She's like, we have interviews through Friday, but you're going to be the first ones if this is what you want to do. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll be there. And I hang up the phone, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Mike didn't know about any of this. Like, he had no idea that I had, done this. And this is, typical Amanda, I do things sometimes. And so I was like, oh, my gosh, what am I going to do? I was freaking out. So I'm like, Mike, I was like, you remember those triplets that I had talked to you about, months ago? He's like, yes. And I was like, so here's the thing. I was like, we have an interview for them on Wednesday at 10 a.m. He's like, what? And I was like, they want us to go to interview to possibly be their parents at 10 a.m. this week. And he's like, no. And I was like, I started to panic, and somehow my powers of persuasion, I managed to get him to go to the meeting. So we get there, and we go in, and they're telling us how we're the first family, and we go through the whole thing. And at this point, we had kind of had a couple other situations. So I felt pretty confident. I felt like we really like answered the questions well and all of that. And we're done. And they said, okay, but just so you know, they said there's like 15, 20 people who all are involved in making these decisions. And we have interviews until Friday. So don't be, freaked out if you don't get a phone call from us for a while. Sometimes it takes a few weeks for us to do things. And so we just want to let you know. And I was like, perfect, that's great. So Mike and I leave, and we're standing at the elevators like very quietly because he's still mad at me. And we're like standing there, and I can like feel him, And he's like, they're going to pick us. And I was like, no, they're not. They're not going to pick us. And he's like, they're going to pick us, Amanda. I just know it. I feel it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So Friday rolls around, and my best friend Dana, she was getting married that weekend. And so we were going out to her rehearsal, and it was literally out in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. And so while we're out there, we have no service. We finally get back into town, and I pull my phone out, and I had all these missed calls, all these voicemails, and I was like, what is happening? And they were like, no names, like numbers, and so I was like, what is this? So I listened to my first voicemail, and it's my social worker, and she's like, hey, Amanda, she's like, congratulations, Carlton. She's like, I just want to let you know that we picked you for the triplets. She's like, yay, Mom, and I was like, and Mike is like, again, glaring at me. I can feel his eyes. And he's like, they picked us, didn't they? And I was like, yeah. And so then he's like so angry. He's so mad at me, and rightfully so. Ladies, don't ever do that. That's not good advice to do things like that. So we get to Dana's rehearsal dinner, and I'm like, okay, there's tension between Mike and I, but I'm going to act like nothing's wrong. I was like, this is her day. I'm not going to be that bridesmaid that makes it all about me. Like, I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to be supportive. I'm going to be good. So I get there, and I feel like I'm being great. And Dana's like, what's wrong? And I was like, what? And, at this point, we had been friends for like 13 years, so she knew me. And I was like, nothing, I'm great. And she's like, nope, what's wrong? And I was like, okay, here's the thing. I was like, we just got picked for triplets, and I'm so happy, but Mike is angry at me, and I just don't think he's going to let us do this, and I don't know what to do, and I've waited all this time. And literally, and I just like freak out on her. And so she's like, I knew something was wrong. And then the next day, we go to the wedding, and I tell my parents, and my dad comes up to Mike, and he's like, Mike, he's like, I'm so happy. He's like, this is the best thing. He's like, what a blessing, and God's answered your prayers. And Mike's like, no, Ernest, this is not a happy moment. This is not what we're supposed to do. And he just like freaks out. But anyways, needless to say, he got over it. We had some wise counsel. We went to some mentors and some people we trusted, and they helped us talk through this. But I think I should be fair and let you know a little bit of his reservations was that my children, because they had such a rocky start to life, they had a lot of medical issues. My daughter, London, she was supposed to be blind and deaf and never walk and possibly have a feeding tube her entire life. They were certain that she would have cerebral palsy. They thought one of our sons might have a mild case of it as well, and that our other son would have to always have breathing treatments. He would have asthma. He would get pneumonia all the time. And he basically had no lungs when he was born. So they kind of just, were like, this isn't good. And so in his defense, he's like, these aren't just fully healthy babies. These are babies that have a lot of medical needs. And so I understand why he felt that way. But I look at that time, and I just think, man, God was so good to us. And if I would have stopped trusting God in that moment when I felt like he was denying me something, I think, what would I have gone through? Like, how would I have really handled all of that? And so my next point, number 3, is how should I wait on God? And that's expectantly. And I felt like in that time, right before the babies, I did have a heart of expectancy. I really did, believe that God had my best intentions at heart. And so I felt like, I was in that place. But Micah 7:7 says, as for me, I look to the Lord for help. I wait confidently for God to save me, and my God will certainly hear me. Psalms 105:5 says, I wait expectantly, trusting God to help, for he has promised. That's some good word right there. What that scripture is saying is that we should expect to hear from God, that we must expect him to give us an answer. We have to believe it with all of our hearts. Waiting on God is never a waste of time, but an investment in your future. See, during that waiting time, you're being refined. It's like God is growing you. He's maturing you. He's strengthening you. He's allowing you to be able to handle the things that come your way. So it's not a waste of time. He was investing in me and in my future because I fully believe 100% that he was preparing Mike and I for 3 babies who had some medical needs, who were born needing some supernatural miracles in their life. And I don't think that I would have been in a place where I could have mentally handled it, and been mature enough to handle that. And so all that time, it wasn't waiting in vain. It was waiting for him to do a work in our lives. And we grew, he and I, we got stronger. It just took us to a whole nother level. And I think about that and I think, man, that was not a waste of my time, because for so long, that's exactly how I felt. Pastor Mike always says that expectation is the breeding ground for miracles. So wait expectantly for the Lord to move. The second way that we wait on God is quietly. This is hard for me. Yeah, don't laugh. I know I have a big mouth. It's hard for most people. Psalm 62:5 says, I wait quietly before God, for my hope is in him. This is David who's saying that. And basically what he's saying is, you need to be still before the Lord. You need to get to a place when you're feeling so overwhelmed that you can just stop for like 2 seconds, contain yourself, slow your thinking, relax your body, relax your mind, and be still before the Lord. Some of the best things that I've ever gone through is when I was just quiet before him, when I just was still and I didn't try to overthink anything. I didn't try to figure something out. I just waited before him. Something else I learned about quietly waiting is that God doesn't want us whining about it. He doesn't want us to make a big deal about things. He really doesn't like those woe is me moments, if you know what I'm talking about. And a good example of this is when Jesus was teaching about fasting in Matthew chapter 6, verse 16. And it says, and when you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do, for they try to look miserable and disheveled so people will admire them for their fasting. I tell you the truth, that is the only reward they will ever get. I remember having conversations with people after my big waiting season and once we had the babies and everything. And I remember like sharing about, kind of using my testimony about the pain and the grief that I went through. And I remember them saying to me, I didn't really know that you had such a hard time with it. And I thought about that, and I remember being in a place where I was like, if I'm always thinking about it, and I'm always talking about it, because every time I did talk about it, I felt like I was getting taken to square one. I felt like every time I talked about how I wanted children and it wasn't happening, I went back to the sorrow. And I felt like I would take a couple steps forward, and then it would get brought up again, and somebody would ask me something, and I would willingly share it, but then I'd get taken back to the beginning of where I started. So I kind of got to this place where I was like, okay, I have to change the way I talk about this. I need to change the way that I approach this. And so I just didn't really talk about it in that way anymore. And I got, to a place where I was just like, okay, it is what it is, and we're moving on with our life, and we're going to move forward. And I felt like it was my version of waiting quietly. It was my way of just kind of taking it a day at a time and just trusting God. And I do know that in that time, God absolutely moved in my life. We must draw attention to our promises and not our problems. And that's what I was doing. I didn't want to focus on the problems. I wanted to focus on the promises that God had for me. And there was so many more than just, starting a family. God had promised me so much more, and I wanted to focus on those things. And I felt like if I kept drawing attention to my problems, all I did was weaken my faith. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay focused, and I wanted to stay trusting. And the last way that we wait on God is confidently. Psalm 27:14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." Mike has shared this a few times, but I'm going to share my version of it. I remember when we got to a place individually where we could wait confidently. And I remember I got to a place where I was like, okay, God, if I don't ever have kids, it's okay. And I truly meant it from the bottom of my heart. And I remember him doing this work in me. And one day, Mike and I were driving, going down the road. And he reaches over and he grabs my hand. And he said, "I want you to know something." And I was like, okay. And he said, "I want you to know that if it's just you and me and we never have children, I'll be okay with that. We'll be okay." He said, "I will be happy, and we will be happy, and we'll live a full life." And I was like, "Do you mean that?" And he was like, "I do." And I said, "You know what? I feel the same way." And I remember this moment in the car between he and I. And I remember feeling like the weight of the world was gone. And it was like the Lord knew that I needed the assurance from my husband that we would be okay. So the waiting was tough, but it was good. And I look at my children now, and I just feel so overwhelmed. And I remember when they came home and it was all settled, I almost had a guilt. And I remember, knowing that it wasn't the Lord putting it on me, but I remember feeling guilty for questioning him. I remember feeling guilty for having such a lack of faith for so many years. And I remember just, it was like, I'm so sorry, God. I am so sorry that I was angry. And I'm so sorry that I had disbelief. And it was like, and then on the flip side, I had this joy that I couldn't express. And it was like, if I never got another thing in my entire life, I would be okay. Because he entrusted Mike and I with the most beautiful gift one could be entrusted with. So the waiting wasn't always well, but I guarantee you that I have shifted in the way that I wait on the Lord. And it's sad to say that I had to wait so long, but he taught me so much through that. And now I have a confidence in the waiting. I have a confidence in his promises. I can read the word and I can believe it. I can trust it. I can cling to it. And when I'm going through something, it's different now. And so today, if there's people here and you are in a waiting season and you feel exhausted, you feel tired, you feel like, when are you going to move, God? I just want you to be encouraged that it is possible to wait in a place of patience. It's possible to wait in assurance. It's possible to wait in confidence. It's possible to wait with an expectant heart. You just have to cling to him. But the first way that you get there is by having a relationship with Jesus. And there may be people in this room tonight that have never walked in a relationship with him. And we're going to give you an opportunity to express your need for him and then to receive his free gift of salvation. So maybe this is your first time doing this. Maybe you used to be tight with God, but you walked away and life happened and you're not serving him anymore. But we're going to give you that opportunity to just shift things tonight, to not wait alone anymore, to not do this life alone. So if everybody could bow your heads and close your eyes. I'd like for you to repeat after me. Dear Jesus, I know I've made mistakes. I know that you died on the cross. And I know that you were raised from the dead. Please forgive me of all my sins. And today I ask you into my heart. I know that I am forgiven. I know that I am chosen. And I know that I matter.
Hi, family. We hope you enjoyed this week's message, and we pray that it spoke to your heart. If you made a decision today to follow Christ, or maybe you recommitted your life to Christ, we want to hear from you. Send us an email at connect@bloomhere.org so that we can send you the next steps in seeing you bloom into who you were created to be. You can also connect with us on our website, bloomhere.org, or visit our Facebook page, Bloom Church, or Twitter and Instagram @ChurchBloom. We look forward to hearing from you. We love you, and we'll see you next week.